What if a mirror, hanging in a Louisiana plantation house, has been blamed for trapping 3 human souls inside it for 200 years, and the mirror itself didn't exist yet when those souls supposedly died? What if the ghost story that made this house famous, told to millions of visitors and printed in best-selling books, was built around a person who left no trace in any historical record? Not a birth certificate, not a sale document, not a single line in 50 years of census data. This is the hidden history of the Myrtles Plantation. The house sits in St. Francisville, Louisiana, built in 1796 by a man named David Bradford. It passed to his daughter Sara, who married a young lawyer named Clark Woodruff. They had 3 children, Cornelia, James, and Mary Octavia. And it's here, in this ordinary Southern household, that the most repeated ghost story in American history supposedly began. The legend says a house slave named Chloe was caught eavesdropping on Clark Woodruff's private conversations. As punishment, her ear was cut off. She began wearing a green turban to hide the wound. Terrified of being sent back to the fields, she baked a birthday cake laced with crushed oleander leaves to make the family sick, not kill them, so she could nurse them back to health and earn back her place in the house. The plan failed. Sara and 2 of her children died. Chloe was hanged by the other enslaved people on the property, her body thrown into the Mississippi River. It is a story that has been printed in guidebooks, told on paranormal television, and repeated by millions of visitors for half a century. There is no historical record that a woman named Chloe ever existed at Myrtles Plantation. By the way, if you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who finds the hidden side of history fascinating. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. New episode every week. Now, back to the Myrtles Plantation. Federal census records confirm the Woodruff family owned enslaved people, 5 in 1820, 32 by 1830. What those records do not contain, anywhere, is the name Chloe. No sale record, no estate document, no church register. In a household whose ownership of human beings was documented in exhaustive, dehumanizing detail by the law of the time, the one name at the center of the legend appears nowhere. The story doesn't hold up on its own terms either. Sara Woodruff did die in 1823, but not from poison. Parish records list her cause of death as yellow fever, a disease that killed thousands across Louisiana that same year. Her children James and Cornelia did die, but more than a year after their mother, a month apart from each other, also consistent with disease. Not a single poisoned cake. And Mary Octavia, the daughter the legend requires to have died as an infant, lived into her 60s. So where did Chloe come from? The answer traces back to Francis Kermeen, who bought the property in the 1970s and later wrote a best-selling book calling it America's Most Haunted House. In interviews given decades later, Kermeen described how the name entered the story, not from historical research, but from a tour guide's account of a ghost a visitor claimed to have seen crying. When asked why, the apparition said she'd just learned her father was white. Someone, at some point, decided to call her Chloe. The name was never attached to a person. It was attached to a feeling, grief, loss, secrecy, that a tour needed a name for. Then there's the mirror. Visitors are told that after Sara and her children died, custom required every mirror in the house to be covered during mourning, and that this particular mirror was overlooked, trapping the family's spirits inside the glass ever since. Guests report handprints that can't be wiped away, faces in the reflection. Owners have replaced the glass entirely, and the marks are said to return. Here's what the legend leaves out. Multiple historical accounts, including researchers who cross-reference the property's furnishing records, conclude the mirror likely wasn't even in the house during the Woodruffs' lifetime. It's believed the Myers family, the same owners who popularized the Chloe story in the 1970s, purchased the mirror separately in New Orleans because it matched the home's decor. If that timeline holds, the mirror the legend calls haunted by a family's trapped spirits may not have existed in that house until nearly 150 years after those spirits supposedly became trapped in it. Not every story at the Myrtles collapses under scrutiny. In 1871, a man named William Winter, who had married into the family that later owned the property, was shot on the front porch by an unidentified assailant. Historical accounts agree this happened. What's disputed is only the detail added later, that he staggered up the staircase and died on the 17th step, a detail no contemporary record confirms. The shooting is real. The dramatic ending is folklore stitched on afterward, the same way Chloe's name was stitched onto a story that needed one. This is the pattern researchers who've dug into the Myrtles keep finding. Not that nothing happened here. Genuine death, genuine loss, a genuine unsolved murder. But that whoever kept telling this story, generation after generation, chose the version with a villain, a motive, and a moral lesson over the version that was simply sad. A mother and 2 children lost to a mosquito-borne illness nobody could stop in 1823 is tragic. A vengeful woman, a severed ear, and a poisoned cake is entertainment. What AI cross-referencing of census data, parish death records, and furnishing timelines has done here isn't disprove that the Myrtles is haunted. People still report cold spots, footsteps, and things they can't explain. What the research has done is separate what's actually documented from what a tour needed to make the house more marketable as America's most haunted house, a title the property has now held for over 50 years. Whether or not the story that earned it ever happened, the house is still there. People still visit by the thousands. The mirror still hangs in the foyer. Nobody named Chloe is in it. Look around. History is everywhere.